Welcome back to On the Road of Recovery. We're here with Danica from Zanesville. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming out. We're going to go ahead and get started. Can you start off with just describing your childhood?
Sure. It's a big question. I guess you could say I had a pretty dysfunctional childhood. I experienced a lot of childhood trauma. And I guess you could say that I probably had a mental health illness at a very young age that was undiagnosed. So I can't tell you when I began to not feel good enough, but as far back as I can remember, I never felt worthy. My father was an alcoholic, and I lived with my mother. My father never wanted me. He denied me, but would still come pick up my sister, and so that left me still with a lot of daddy issues, you know. But with that being said, besides that, my sister, who was a couple years older than me, got diagnosed with brain cancer when I was 9 and she was 11. Basically, at that point, I had to grow up really quickly and be good and stay out of the way. So that my sister could be taken care of and have all the attention on her, which was fine. I wasn't in schools for very long. I moved a lot of places, moved from a lot of schools, and lived with a different people to be able to, so my mom could manage taking care of me while being in children's hospital with my sister. So I think I was wild too. I was a bad kid. I would scream to get my way, and I would not stop screaming until I got my way. That's just the way I was. And I had this like distorted thinking, right? Like everything was about me, and why did this happen to me? Or I'm a fuck up, you know. And so, long story short, and like I know my mom did her best, but we did not have a lot of supervision. And so I got to do a lot of things early. I started smoking when I was 9. I started drinking and smoking weed when I was 11. And I became sexually active at a young age too, you know. And so kind of talking about childhood, which I consider 18 and younger, I got pregnant when I was 14 with my son and had him when I was 15 years old. My sister died when I was 14. And so that kind of made me go crazy. And so shortly after that, I got pregnant, which kind of saved my life a little bit. It wasn't too long after I had my son that me and his father just started experimenting and got addicted. So I was pretty addicted by the age of 17 to more than just alcohol or weed, but that as well. So that's a little bit about what my childhood was like. I did graduate high school a couple years early, thankfully going to an alternative school, which was great so I could parent my child. But it was by the age of 17. 17 years old, I'm addicted. I got involved with children's services for the first time, got introduced to 12-step programs, jail and probation, and you know, I had gotten into a physical altercation with my mother. I had a lot of resentments towards her. Obviously, that stemmed from my childhood that we kind of talked about a little bit. And we got into a physical altercation, and that led me to being arrested with 3 felonies over my head. I spent 3 days in jail. And after those 3 days, they took me to a room, which was, lo and behold, probation. I get introduced to probation. They tell me I need to go to AA meetings, and I got involved with, they told me I'd be involved with children's services, and that there was a protection order against me and my mom and against me and my son for 30 days. And, you know, that process started. So after that, I went and lived with friends with my son's father, who we weren't together. That's kind of what started the whole issue with my mother. And this led to, you know, the beginning of working a case plan, the beginning of probation and meeting those requirements, and being introduced to a 12-step program, and doing a drug and alcohol assessment and a mental health assessment, the whole shebang. But did you know, and I say this because, did you know that if you go into probation and test positive, they put you in jail? I didn't. I mean, maybe I knew, but I didn't think I would actually test positive, or if I did, they would let me go, or I didn't think they were going to drug test me that day. So shortly after, maybe 3-4 months after getting introduced to all of this stuff, I failed a drug test. And they put me in jail, and they sent me to a residential women's program. And that was my first taste of treatment. Before that, I had been doing an outpatient program, wasn't successful. I didn't want it. I was very rebellious. I challenged therapists and anybody that kind of got in my way because that's where I was mentally, which was very frustrating to people. I was just very angry. But anyways, I go to this treatment program, and I remember, like, it was a great program. Any treatment program is great and can work if you're ready. But I remember being in this treatment program and telling them, like, I don't have a problem. All I do is smoke weed. Right? That's what I told them, you know? And so guess what? They graduated me anyways at the end of my stay because that's how that works. And I'll tell you, my mom was so proud of me. You know, I got to go back home and live with my parents and my son. My mom was so proud of me that she bought me a brand new car. I signed it up for college and was starting to go to college and you know, thinking that all I need to do is be a good mom and I can stay sober. All I need to do is get a good job and I can stay sober. And not realizing that's just not how it worked. I didn't change the old people, places, or things. I was still doing the same things, just thinking maybe I can control it or I won't let it get that far again, or all I need to do is change this or that. And before you knew it, I was doing hard drugs again and lying to children's services and hiding from probation and trying to stay out of jail and putting my son in high-risk situations, who is 4, 5, 6 years old at the time, you know. And it was just literally a downward spiral. This was like slower. Like it took maybe 6 months to a year for all of this to like, before everything really hit the fan hard. Before I wasn't allowed to see my son anymore, be around him. Before I was homeless. Before, you know, I had lost everything. So I can kind of tell you a little bit more about the end of my addiction if you would like.
Yep.
Okay. So at this point, I'm using meth and then other things, right? Meth was the hardest drug at this point in time that I was using. I couldn't really fake it anymore, you know, and I'm trying to get sober. You know, children's services wanted me to get sober. They knew I was lying. My mom wanted me to get sober. She knew I was lying. But this is how sick this disease is that I would manipulate you and lie to you and make you feel like crap for thinking that I was using. I tried to make you think that my behaviors were normal, and it worked. It worked for a really long time. Matter of fact, it worked so well that they gave me custody of my son back, and I was still using meth.
Wow.
So let me tell you, 2 months later, my son got taken. Not even 2 months later. Because I'll tell you, I turned my house into a trap house willingly. I let my drug dealer live there, basically. I had people in and out of my house all the time, and my mom took my son, and the next day I was served papers. And I testified in court for about 6 hours, maybe 8, trying to prove why I should be able to have custody of my son, and it didn't work because they knew. They're like, okay, go get a hair follicle test then. We're open to children's services case again. And, you know, I would do anything and everything to try to pass those drug tests besides not use. You know, I would detox, I would strip my hair, I would dilute, I would do anything. And it just didn't work. They seen right through it. And my mom got full custody of my son. And before you know it, I'm using heroin, you know. And when my drug dealer laid the line out on the table, like, I was thinking, like, is this a good idea, you know? But I was so high that I did it anyways. And I remember being so sick, literally vomiting for hours because I had done too much. Like, they were like, you were supposed to share that with her. You should not have done that much. And I literally was vomiting, but it didn't matter because I was addicted at that point. I wanted more, you know. And before you knew it, I couldn't pay first of all, I was going to college and I was working at Steak and Shake too. I quit my job. I dropped out of college after 3 semesters, which now I owe $12,000 to student loans, which is just fantastic. But you know, I quit that because I thought I was a good drug dealer. You know, I'm like, why would I do this if I can just sell drugs? And before you know it, I didn't pay my rent. You know, I wasn't paying my rent. My drug dealer went to prison for murder. People were robbing me and you know, doing things, and it just got very dark and scary. You know, I was up for days or passing out all the time, high, whichever one I decided to be on in that moment. And it was very bad. The water got shut off. I was still living in my house even though it was evicted. I was evicted, and you know, just things got very bad. Long story short, I ended up becoming homeless, couch surfing. things changing drastically for me. At this point, I'm not even seeing my child, right? So talking about that a little bit before I move on. My parents got custody of my son, and this is how sick this disease is. It didn't matter that I wanted to be a good mom. You know, it didn't matter that I wanted to have a good life. I didn't understand why I couldn't just get high and be okay, and why people wouldn't leave me alone. But because it's not safe. I didn't see the problem with those behaviors though. But it got so to the point so much that I would maybe call home every 3 months and beg my mom to let me come home and tell her I was never going to do this again, and that I just wanted to be a good mom and be safe, and she would let me come home, and I'd be there for maybe a day or two. I'd shower, I'd eat, I'd hang out with my son, and before you know it, the cravings were too bad, and I would just leave out in the middle of nowhere. And they wouldn't hear me from me again for maybe 3 months, if not more, at end, and then the cycle would happen over and over again. Mom, I need money, I need a place to stay, I need this, I want to see my son. Make her feel like crap for saying no to me, even though, because she was doing her best, she was trying to, and not enable me, or didn't want the same thing to happen. And that was a sick cycle for years, that I put my family through. I don't know how many times I told my son that I would be there and didn't show up, or he wanted me to stay and I couldn't, because I could only think about getting high, because I was literally craving a drug, or I would get sick, but I still couldn't say, hey, I need help. Hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Even though people were like, you should just go get help, but I couldn't think about that. I couldn't, because all I could think about was getting high. I couldn't think about not doing that. I couldn't think about going to another treatment center, I couldn't think about that. I couldn't see it. So progressing again, so that's kind of how my family was affected by that, and my son, who's seen me come in and out of his life. It got to the point to where my mom wouldn't answer the phone anymore. I was in and out of jail like crazy for possession, or breaking and entering, or who knows what. And I was homeless. I couldn't couch surf anymore. I'm not a good thief. I couldn't sell drugs anymore because I was too busy doing them. And I got involved in human trafficking, and that lasted almost 2 years. And so I would stay in hotels and pay to use people's cars, or pay to take showers, or whatever. And in my head, it sounded really good. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go do this date, and I'm going to take this money and buy a car, or I'm going to take this money and get a house, or I'm going to get on my feet, and this will all be over soon, and I won't have to keep selling my body to live, I mean, it didn't work out like that. It every time I would get robbed, or I would use the money, or whatever. And it was a sick cycle for a long time. And I'll tell you, it continued like that for a while. I didn't stop that cycle. What happened was I went to jail. Some things had happened. We went down at a hotel, and I got a felony for it. I sent a text warning somebody that the cops were looking for them. They found the people. 30 seconds later, they seen the text on their phone, and they came back and arrested me. And I got a felony for that, for sending a text message. That felony saved my life. Not in that moment. I went to jail for a couple months, and my mom got me out on OR, and I really wanted to be sober. I really wanted to not go back to jail. I really wanted to make this work, and I still wasn't willing to change the old people, places, and things. I was still hanging out with the same people, and at first I was just drinking. And before you knew it, I was still up drinking, and my friends had passed out, and I'm looking for a bag. I would need to get high, and before you know it, I'm off to the races. I couldn't stop at that point. I remember there being a warrant out for my arrest because I was on an OR bond, so I was on reporting. I needed to report and drug screen, and I couldn't do it. And I told my mom, like, this is it for me. And I went on the run for a couple months, when they caught me, because they always do. They will always catch you. I almost died from withdrawal in the Muskegon County Jail. It was really bad. And I'll be honest with you, if they would have released me that day, I still would have went out and got high. It still would have not mattered. I still would have used, because I'll tell you, homelessness, prostitution, multiple overdoses, multiple jails, multiple institutions, the loss of my child, the loss of my identity is not what got me sober. It isn't. That's not what worked for me. And I'll tell you what got me sober was that moment. that moment of radical acceptance for who I was, that moment of complete desperation, of I'm fucked and I don't know what I'm going to do, is what changed. Now, I'll be honest with you again, if they still would have let me out the next day, I wouldn't have lasted long. But that's not what happened for me. So when I almost died from withdrawals in the jail, they sent me to a program, CBCF, correctional facility lockdown thing, and I could not be honest. I could not be honest in this program. They would tell me who I was. They told me what I was doing out there, and I would just cry, and I couldn't be honest with myself. And before you know it, I relapsed. I used one time. I told myself, what's not heroin, it's not going to kill me. I'm only going to do it once, and nobody will know. Well, I used a pill. I went back to the facility because they let you out to go to outside meetings and to do community service. That's part of you graduating the program. And they knew. They knew. Now, let me tell you about this stay at CBCF. It's about a 4-month program. My mom and my son started coming around. They were visiting me. My mom's birthday is October 23rd. It's Halloween. So they were coming up the next day. That we were going to carve pumpkins. This was my last visit. I was going to be graduating in a couple weeks, and I used. And that's my sobriety date, because I will never forget not getting that visit with my son. I will never forget not getting to celebrate my mom's birthday. And I will never forget walking into jail sober, thinking, what the fuck am I going to do with my life? I can't sleep this one out. They're gone forever. What do I have now? I don't have anything, and I'm like, what am I going to do? And again, like, if they would have let me out that day, I wouldn't have lasted long. God had a bigger plan for me. My probation officer seen something in me that I never seen in myself. Because the time before, when they sent me to CBCF, they said, don't let me see you back in this courtroom or we're going to make an example out of you. Okay, well, I knew. I'm like, I'm going to prison. That's what's happening. I'm going to prison. And God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. It's the only thing I can explain it as, because they sent me to a program. They didn't send me to prison. They sent me to a program. And I'll tell you, that's where I got sober. My sobriety date is October 22nd, 2015. I'll celebrate 6 years coming up. And this was not a lockdown facility. You could leave at any time. And it was a lengthy program. I was there for almost 8.5 months in a residential women's program. And that's where my recovery started. That it housed about 20 women at a time. And I was there with other women who were in different spots of their journey. Some of them had just got there too. Some people were in the middle, and some of them were getting ready to graduate and go live their lives. And I wanted that. I knew what was out there waiting for me. They came and interviewed me in jail, and they said, if you want to leave because it's not a lockdown facility, what can I tell you to help motivate you to not leave? And I said, I don't want to be homeless or prostitute anymore. I don't want that, And I knew if I left, that's all that was going to be out there for me, and I would die. And so I stayed. And the program was amazing. I let that work for me. I made it work for me. And that's where my journey started.
What are some of the things that you learned in that program?
So much. I mean, gosh, so much. In a nutshell.
Take as much time as you want.
So I learned to be honest. The other women there were honest. And that showed me that I wasn't the only one and that it was okay. Hey, I did that too. Oh, you did? So maybe I can finally tell somebody that. Even though everybody else already knew, I hadn't been honest about it myself. I can finally be honest with myself and everybody else. And that was the biggest part. I learned that trauma is a thing. And what I went through was not normal, that was trauma. And that probably drove a lot of what I did and who I was. And that maybe it's genetic, and that the disease that I have is not just addiction, but the mental health, that it very well be genetic as well. And that, gosh, to use the support that I had. So many people were there, counselors and the women in the program were there to support me and help me along the way, and they showed me, the tools to use and what to do to be okay. They helped me set goals, and I didn't have any hope for my future. I didn't feel like I deserved anything, and I learned forgiveness. That was the biggest thing. It took me about 7 months in that program to forgive myself. And I couldn't begin to really, really, really start my journey until I could forgive myself. I had so much shame. I felt so worthless, and I did not feel like I deserved a single thing in my life, which we talked about has been with me all my life. But especially after the damage that I had caused, I didn't feel like I could ever be anybody.
So after you left treatment, then what did you do?
Okay, so my mother and my son came back into the picture again. Didn't think that was ever going to happen. So after I graduated, I got to go home and live with them, with my parents and my son, which was hard. It's very hard, despite the fact that my mother, who is not an addict, has lived with addicts, alcoholics, and people like us all of her life. And even though she was my biggest supporter, she still didn't understand. And she could still tear me down as quickly as she can build me up. And so it was very hard. Learning how to be a mom again was very hard. I did not know who my child was. That was the hardest part of early recovery, is that I didn't even know how to be a mom. I did not know who my own child was. Here's my mom and dad parenting my son, and they're doing it so well. They're doing it. And I felt like an outsider looking in. I felt hopeless and worthless. And I didn't know how to do it, and I was scared. And I didn't ever think I was going to be able to do it. I thought, well, if they're doing it so good, why don't I just let them? Why don't I just go? You know? And I spent so many nights on the phone with my sponsor crying, telling her I don't know if I can do this. And she would tell me it's going to be okay. You can. And so I used the tools when it got really hard that I had until I was out of the tools, and I'd do them again. And I would do them again, and I would do them again, and I would make that shit work, you know? Because I'll run out of my tools, but I'm just going to keep reusing them, you know? But I didn't know to take my son's homework out of his book bag. I didn't know to cut the crust off of his sandwich. I didn't know I should probably bathe him and put him to bed at a certain time, even though you think that that stuff's natural. I'll tell you, when I say I withdrawed in jail, it was more than that. I was dead. Literally, I couldn't look you in the eyes. I couldn't make a conversation with you. I couldn't function as a person. Okay, the drugs had literally did something to me that made me like a very unstable person. So, again, things that you thought might be natural aren't to people in recovery. We have lost some of the senses of doing certain things and what's normal. And so these things that should have just came natural didn't. And it made me feel really hopeless as a person. But I learned. I learned slowly with the help of a lot of people in my life how to be a mom again. And that's been the most rewarding part of my recovery, I think. Today I have full custody of my child, and I'm mom. And he's almost 13, and it's hard raising a teenage boy, but it's okay because I would never change anything for the world. And it was hard seeing my parents parent him. It was hard co-parenting in general because they do things this way and I want to do things this way, and then we fight about it. Or they're trying to tell me this and I don't want to hear it because I think this is the way, or they're trying to tell me what to do, or getting between me and my son when I'm trying to handle disputes or discipline or doing this and that. And it became very complicated really quick. Very hard. I'm a leader, and my mom is too, and it just became a very unhealthy situation really quickly. Now, granted, I'm very thankful for everything she did for me. I lived with her for about a year, maybe two. I think about a year and a half before I finally got my first apartment. And I did. So I'll tell you, the biggest part of early recovery was that I could not find a job for the life of me. I had interviewed at multiple places. Let me tell you, back up a little bit. I didn't have anything. I didn't have a dime to my name. I didn't have anything. My mom had to give me clothes out of her closet for me to wear. I didn't have anything. I didn't even have an ID or a birth certificate or a social security card. And so getting all those things back was a challenge. It's very hard, as if I had it done 10 times before. So I went to meetings. And they told me to hang out with the winners, people with women with long-term sobriety. I did that. You know, I'm like, I need to stay sober. I went to meetings. I didn't have a car. We didn't live in town. I'm like, hey, I wasn't afraid to ask for help at this point. What are you doing after the meeting? Can I go with you? Hey, when are you going to the next meeting? Can you pick me up? You know, what can I do? And I started going to church. They took us to church and rehab. And I went to this local church that I had went to, so it's a long story. But and so I'm willing to do anything to stay sober at this point. And the church was doing a blitz build with Habitat for Humanity, so going one day and doing building a house. So I went, which was a great experience, let me tell you. And I'm like, we barely put a dent in it, honestly. And I'm like, well, who's going to build the rest of this house? And they're like, oh, well, we take volunteers. And I'm like, okay, sign me up. I need this. I need something to help me stay sober, right? And it was so funny because the instructor guy, me and him were usually the only ones there every day, was in recovery himself.
Oh, cool.
And so it was like a meeting every day. It was like God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. He actually gave me one of my very first meditation books and everything. And that's what helped me stay sober at the beginning. I had to stay busy. I eventually got a job, and I was working doubles, working at Habitat for Humanity, finishing this build of this house, and working my gas station job, who they gave me a chance after I was told them about who I was. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of my recovery, you know, doing anything to stay sober. I went to meetings. I hung out with people in recovery. I went to recovery events. I was working my butt off trying to do anything, volunteering, and then getting a job, and, you know, trying to you know, live sober.
So what's life like today for you?
So it's amazing. I'll tell you a little bit about what it is. So I work a lot. I am a peer recovery supporter, which is a person with lived experience with mental health and or addiction, and then we get to do that. We get to work with people in recovery, in early recovery, and no recovery, and help them in that aspect. And I've been a peer recovery supporter for 3 years. So I worked in the gas stations, I worked in warehouses, and for a lot of the beginning of my recovery, and I'm like, gosh, this is not it. Like, this is just not it. Then peer support got introduced to me, and I've been doing that ever since. And that's my purpose. That's my passion. That's what I love to do. I love to work with others that are just like me. And who knew? Who knew I could get paid for that and love it, you know? So I've been doing that for the past 3 years. And with that journey, I am a facilitator to train new peer supporters. I've been doing that for the past year. And I actually just got a position to be a master facilitator, which is like a dream come true. It's all such a dream come true. I do a crisis hotline after hours as well. That's pretty much, I work at Ohio Guidestone and with Children's Services. I'm a recovery coach for Children's Services with the START and EPIC program. And I get to work with women and men, parents, who are getting involved with the child welfare system like I did. And I think, like, okay, how can I help them progress through their case plan and help them reunify? How can I help them be today? How can I help them by being who I might have needed when it was me, you know? Because I didn't have that, you know? I didn't have somebody talking to me who'd been there and done that. All I had was caseworkers and therapists and people that I didn't think knew what it was like. And so that's really what I love to do. I'd love to get to work with Children's Services in Ohio Guidestone, which is now patient treatment center. And so I've been with them for 2 years as well. And I'm just so thankful for that. Again, so I have custody of my son. I have a house now, so I started in a small one-bedroom apartment. And I actually have a very nice house today. And I've had custody of him for 2 years. Life is good. I have a fiance and a stepdaughter, and we're about to get married. And life's a dream come true. I mean, he's in recovery as well. And we strengthen each other. We really are like two peas in a pod. It's like peanut butter and jelly, right? Like we really we bring each other up and strengthen each other, and we couldn't be happier with the lives that we both have today. Getting to help others and just live sober and be there and let people know, like, it is possible. Because if you can just imagine in your head, because everybody's seen them, the people walking on the streets that look dead, that we think are hopeless and, you know, just look horrible, and you think any minute now they're gonna die. Like, that was me. You know, I didn't look like this 6 years ago. This was not who I was 6 years ago. And if you would have seen me then, you would have thought that it was going to be any minute that you would have read my obituary. And yet here I am, you know, and not everybody's story looks like that. Not everybody's story is as deep and as, like, dark as that. Like, not everybody has to be homeless or a prostitute or addicted to this or addicted to that to get into recovery. It doesn't matter how bad it was. It doesn't have to be so bad that, you know, this is enough for you. But that's just what it's like for me. You know, and unfortunately, like, it did get that far, but we do recover, you know, and I can tell you that me and my son have such a positive relationship today. After I learned how to be a mom and learn how to create stability and consistency and a normal for him and for us, like he began to forgive me and trust me again. You know, after everything that I put my family through, today I can have healthy relationships, and I think that's the biggest part that matters. Is that I can have healthy relationships, I can be healthy and have a purpose. The one thing that I held on to the most was don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens, because the miracle does happen and it comes in tenfold, and that 5 minutes may feel like a lifetime, but it's worth it if you can just hang on 5 more minutes. It's worth it, and you're worth it, and you deserve it.